I'm excited to react to this next Bellular Clips post that talks about banning the correct way to deal with community toxicity. I have no idea what their views on this are going to be, but oftentimes both the WoW and 14 community are familiar with the 14 community regularly saying they are the better community by some imaginary objective measure. Both games have a terms of service. Both games enforce that terms of service. The depth of that terms of service, what it allows and what it does not, and the depth to which it is enforced and how strictly it is enforced and who it is enforced against and when it is enforced, as far as you being in-game or out of game on places like Discord, Reddit, or streaming, is drastically different between these games. So when you compare the communities, I don't think you can do them without this subject, and I look forward to seeing what these two think about it.
That we got from Dark Soul 9669. On the topic of the niceness of the Final Fantasy XIV community, it's also definitely a result of a report/moderation system that matters. No one click. You file a report, a GM then talks to you. Holy shit. Wow. How do they do that? How do they go through so many reports? Or is it the sort of thing of some...
Well, first of all, they don't. Anybody who's ever needed Final Fantasy XIV support because a two-factor authentication has gone wrong, or they're having an issue in game, it is, they don't, is the simple answer.
Somebody's reported enough, then it's flagged to a GM? That's crazy. You see, it's weird. I don't really feel that solving that with sheer manpower is a, like, viable solution. And also, World of Warcraft is such a goddamn massive game between retail and classic that if Blizzard was to do that, I think it wouldn't really work. And God, they need so many staff. You need to bring on so many staff to handle that. But that's so interesting that FF does it that way. So you file a report. That makes it almost seem like you actually have to type in a little bit.
For all but reporting RMT, you have to go manually do it. RMT, you can just right-click the name, file a report. It goes to a little drop-down for all of your choices, and all of your choices are report for RMT.
Wow. Wow. You know, it's interesting dealing with community toxicity and stuff. Oh, you get a 24-hour ban if you mess it up. And the Glacier saying not many reports. Right. I guess it's just worked then, their whole plan. I suppose it's the sort of thing, you know, when you're setting culture.
GMs have a hard job. So game masters have a hard job. Being in anybody who's ever worked in any form of communities of like a service industry, whether they've been a waiter or they've been a customer service rep on a phone or anything like that, it's a lot like we're working at the lost luggage counter. You're only interacting with people who have already had something wrong with their day in many of your interactions. Not all, but many. And so feeling appreciated often isn't part of the job description. And so the GMs in both games get an enormously huge amount of hate for the fact that they enforce something that for all the people that appreciate it, we don't really have a way of regularly reaching out and saying thank you. For people who have interacted with them, I have never had anything but a polite and professional interaction anytime I've interacted with GMs in either game. I have interacted with GMs in-game, in WoW. Never in 14. I've always done it by email, but I've always filed by email, so I'm not shocked by that. That's just my own personal experience, but it's always been professional. It's always been kind. And as a matter of fact, I have heard people say, hey, my WoW subscription lapsed, and I wanted to pay it with gold. What can you do for me? And not in all cases, this isn't a requirement that they have to do, but I've heard of WoW GMs gifting 7 days of playtime to players so that they can log in and go back to playing with gold. So the kindness is there, but customer service can be a really, really hard thing.
Like a company culture or something. You got to get it right at the start, because then it permeates through. This is interesting. There was a super from Dark Soul
Yes.
who said, basically, in FF,
Yeah.
if you want to report a player, you like file a report and then a GM talks to you about it.
I've never experienced that 'cause I've never had to do it, but I have seen things that they have
There are plenty of 14 players and WoW players that feel that they report bots and nothing happens.
have a significantly more active GM staff, any like decent forms of, or any like strong forms of toxicity is punished very swiftly, and you know like
Good should be.
yeah, just if you call someone out for like if you're an asshole, you get put in jail, like
Good.
yeah.
Now that's the key difference. So one of the key differences in the terms of service, I'm glad they're getting to it, is that harassment is taken very, very, very seriously in 14. And so a lot of times people say, well, don't tell people about your DPS meters because you can get banned for that. But actually, it's not the act of running a DPS meter that gets you banned. It's the act of the harassment. And the harassment can get you banned even if the DPS meter is not present. Simply harassing people can do that. And for anybody that's ever taken a form of harassment training in a workplace, you are aware that harassment is defined by the person being harassed, not the person doing it. And so if you tell somebody one thing as they show up to work and it goes fine, and you tell somebody else the exact same thing in the exact same tone and they receive it differently, you can be reported to HR for the second one. And it may feel like, what the heck, I've always done that and it was fine. That's because it was fine right up until it wasn't, and it's not your call to make. And so Final Fantasy does take that very, very seriously.
Same with like any mention of like ACT for the advanced combat tracker for DPS. If you use that to talk shit about someone,
Oh, you're gonna get banned.
if they report you, JM will sort you out. Like
So that's actually a way of combating that type of toxicity.
yeah,
That's really interesting.
yep.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? Props to them for that one. That's genuinely pretty cool. They're able to do it.
Well, we're saying that's like in-game support for GM stuff. Square Enix are awful for customer support in general, it seems.
I mean, judging by how
When Vanilla WoW first launched, occasionally you would be running along and you would like get stuck in a tree, like your character's in a tree. This is just an old thing that isn't true anymore. And they didn't have the unstuck button, which basically like burns your hearth. And so a GM used to have to teleport out to you and manually remove you from the tree in Vanilla. Just as a side thing. It's not how either game does anything anymore.
the Mog Station looks and feels, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no, it is a complete another complete nightmare. But it's just the what I call it, the ever watching eye of basically there. You can't step out of line or else you will be got. Like people know that, they
Fair
feel
enough.
that, instead of you being able to say whatever you want.
There
And
should be rules. Those rules should be enforced.
Yep.
Simple as that. I mean, it's like, what would it look like if whenever you were in Nathri and you looked at /1, it wasn't, you know, I mean, in some cases, like, just actual genuine racism going on, or like any of that crazy shit that goes on in /1. It's like, what would, wow.
Now, I want to be clear. If you simply ban the people who are saying racist, intolerant remarks, politically charged, religious, anything, if they are bashing anything, if you simply ban them, that doesn't stop them from saying it, thinking it, feeling it. It's one of the many criticisms of bashing free speech when it's free speech we don't like, when it verges on hate speech, is that you don't actually teach that person not to say it, you encourage them to go say it in private, where it has a chance to fester. You're not spending time engaging with it and poking holes in it. Now, allowing it to run free is not good either, and so it's a really hard line that society has to deal with. I'm not trying to state my view on any of this, I'm just saying it's a complex issue and it's not that black and white. There are arguments on both sides. We should not allow hate to go out there and gain new followers, but if we simply tell hate that it's not welcome here, that doesn't stop it from existing. And so WoW and 14 both handle this very differently in the context of video games, and thankfully in video games we can talk about things usually without bringing in religion, race, sexuality, economy, global geopolitics and all that. But they do make it in. They are played by real people. They are done by real companies that have things going on in the real world. And so it does make it in. And how these games engage with that is very different. Final Fantasy XIV does pride itself in the fact that trade chat, while Sprout chat oddly can be pretty bad, that trade chat and general chat, while it might be spammed with like, hey, would you like to buy Gil for money? Or would you like to pay for a clear or something like that? Those things still make it in. That a lot of the racism and politically charged stuff seems to keep out. That is not because they are not felt by portions of the community. That is not because there are good people and bad people in this world as monoliths and that we need to isolate them in which game they play. It is because we live in a curated garden. We live in a place where the weeds have been pulled. It is not that there are not, we just pull them and toss them behind the shed. We just hide them. They're still there. We simply prune the garden that you work in. And so when you see toxicity, it usually takes place on streams, YouTube videos, Reddit threads, Discords, outside of game. Now, Final Fantasy has taken that pruning and has said, hey, outside of our walled garden, there's some weeds in the parking lot. And they have gone to the point where they have even banned streamers and YouTubers and people who have posted things to Reddit where they've revealed their characters' info. And so a lot of times bashing Reddit posts still blur the names and all of that because you can be banned for that off platform. Once again, does not teach these people why it is wrong, does not teach these people to have empathy or feel better. It simply slaps them on the nose with a ruler and sends them on their way. We simply hide it until it looks better. I don't know which way is the correct way, but I do want to note, World of Warcraft lets them run free. Final Fantasy says not in my house. Neither one engages with this population in a meaningful way.
Those communities and chat channels be like if it was like less of that horse shit and less of the spam the trade chat gets inundated with. And it was I don't know what it would look like. I don't even know what it looks like in FF. I've not paid attention. But it does make you wonder.
Yeah, so I think they actually kind of really only touched this on the surface. They were really just excited that Final Fantasy has an actual in-zone jail they can take you to if you've done something bad, that they can pop up and really message you in-game if you're having a bad experience, which in World of Warcraft, I've been chatted with in-game every time I filed a report if I'm live when the GM gets to it. If I'm not online, they've done it by email. I assume Final Fantasy is the same way. I've filed less tickets in my time in Final Fantasy than I have in World of Warcraft. Most of my time in both games filing tickets is centered on something that broke, something where a piece of loot didn't function correctly, something with that. I very rarely go out of my way to report another gamer because I find that typically, in my experience, it doesn't actually fix that gamer's behavior, and in most cases, it actually just makes that bad part of my day last longer. That's my own personal way of avoiding that. I don't know if it's healthy. That's just how I play. And so I think that free speech in video games, free speech in these as particular social platforms, is a sensitive issue. I don't think there's one size fits all, but it is interesting, and I wish this post had been longer, that World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy choose to handle it so oppositely, and that both of those have pros and cons. As people come into Final Fantasy, they are often given a ton of warning up front. Don't talk about add-ons in game. Don't talk about, all these, don't tell another player this. And there are people in this community that feel, because they don't know if the things they are saying are going to be received as toxic or not, that it is easier to just not engage. And I don't know if that's really the right answer, but that's just how that works. I think that neither of these really addresses the issue on its head in as meaningful a way as something like Square Enix's Outriders, where if somebody is caught cheating, they're moved to a cheating server. And that sends a message to that person. What you're doing is fine as long as you're only impacting people like you. And then they get to see in a mirror what that feels like playing with cheaters. I don't think that this does anything meaningful as far as enlightening things or anything like that. I think that you're choosing to trust that public shame can correct the behavior, or you're choosing that private shame can correct the issue, and it doesn't actually address it. Both games, in my opinion, have a community issue. World of Warcraft wears its toxicity on its sleeve. It is often complained about from people who simply tried to try the game. Final Fantasy leaves theirs much more polite and underhanded, and so you are fine right up until you post something that says, hey, I really like the game, but... And then after that, a handful of a minority of the population can come out and say, I have a real problem with your complaint, and I'm going to express that to you in a very extreme way. And so both games have an underside. It's just how hidden and secret is it that makes them different, in my opinion. And bans are kind of the most visible enforcement of that. So I think that I wish this stuff didn't have an impact. I wish that we could just focus on games. It's what I love about games. But unfortunately, anytime there's people playing in a multiplayer game, you have to talk about this stuff too. Kinda.